By 1970, the very air in Laos had changed. The winds of war, once blowing in their favor, now carried a chilling message for the Hmong forces at Long Cheng. The enemy, the North Vietnamese army, no longer feared this secret city. After years of relentless, grinding conflict, they were coming, swarming across the mountains, like a flood, dragging the shadow of communism with them. For the Hmong people, this wasn't just a strategic shift, it was an apocalypse. Villages, once vibrant with life, were reduced to ash. Families who had tilled the same land for generations were forced to flee with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Their homeland, nestled in the rugged highlands, trembled like a leaf caught in a hurricane. Long Cheng, the CI's secret base, the fortress of Hmong hope, now stood on the precipice of annihilation. Its runways, which had once been the arteries of the resistance, bustling with planes carrying food, medicine, and ammunition, were now scarred with the ugly pockmarks of shell craters. The laughter of children playing in the streets had vanished, replaced by the constant, gut-wrenching rumble of distant artillery, a sound that promised only death and destruction. In the heart of this crumbling fortress stood a man named Chong Neng. He was no longer the young, eager soldier he had once been. By 1970, he was a commander. The first strands of gray streaked his hair, and his eyes held a hardened, distant look, the look of a man who had seen too much blood, too much fire. He had buried more friends than he could count and sent countless young men, boys really, into battles they would never return from. Yet he stood tall. He had too, Long Cheng, and what was left of his people needed him. One evening, as a blood-red sun sank behind the jagged mountain ridges, casting long, menacing shadows across the valley, Chong Neng gathered his weary men. You could see the war etched onto their faces. Their uniforms were torn and caked with mud, their bodies gaunt from hunger and exhaustion. But as they looked at their commander, you could see that their spirits, though battered, were not broken. He looked at them, not as a general addressing an army, but as a brother speaking to his family. "Brothers," he began, his voice rough but clear, "the enemy is stronger than they have ever been. They come with tanks, they come with planes, they come with thousands upon thousands of men. But remember this," he paused, letting his gaze sweep over them. "This is our home. Long Cheng is not just a base, it is our heart. If we must die here, then let us die as Hmong warriors." It wasn't a speech about victory, it was a speech about defiance, and in their tired eyes, a spark ignited, a quiet resolve settled over the men. They would not give their home away cheaply. The assault, when it came, was swift and brutal. The Vietnamese army struck from all sides, a coordinated storm of steel and fire. Artillery rained down, turning the sky orange and black. The ground shook violently as rockets slammed into bamboo houses, splintering them into nothing. The air filled with the screams of women and children as they scrambled for the relative safety of the jungle, a desperate, chaotic exodus. Chong Neng and his men fought with a ferocity born of desperation from behind hastily built barricades. They met the enemy with rifle fire and grenades. For hours they held their ground, the world around them a swirling vortex of smoke, dust, and the deafening roar of battle. The constant rhythmic chatter of machine guns echoed across the valley like the drums of doom, each burst announcing another life extinguished. But the tide was simply unstoppable. It was like trying to hold back the ocean with a wall of sand. Wave after wave of enemy soldiers surged forward, their sheer numbers overwhelming the defenders. By nightfall, the fires of burning buildings lit up the sky. Chong Neng watched in agony as the enemy flag, a symbol of everything they had fought against, began to rise over the strongholds where the Hmong flag had once flown so proudly. His heart ached with a physical pain, watching the place he had dedicated his life to defending crumble and burn before his very eyes. Every instinct screamed at him to fight to the last man, to die in the ashes of his home. But he was a commander, and his duty was to his men, to the future of his people. Still, he refused to simply surrender their spirit. Rallying the remnants of his unit, he shouted above the cacophony of war, "Do not give them our spirit. Fight until your last breath." Amidst the chaos, a new order arrived from the top. General Vang Pao, the leader of the Hmong resistance, commanded key units to retreat. The goal was no longer to hold Longcheng. It was to preserve what little was left of the Hmong army, to keep the flame of resistance alive, even if it was just a flicker. Chongneng was torn. His soul, his warrior's heart, demanded he stay and die with Longcheng, but his duty, his loyalty to his general and his people called him to survive. He had to fight another day. As flames devoured what remained of the village, Chongneng made the hardest decision of his life. He led his surviving men away from the inferno, disappearing into the hidden mountain paths that only the Hmong knew. Behind them, Longcheng, the proud, defiant heart of the Hmong nation, was swallowed by the enemy. Later that night, Chongneng sat alone on a high ridge, looking back at the angry red glow on the horizon that marked the grave of his city. His hands, the same hands that had held a rifle with unshakable resolve for years, now trembled. It wasn't from fear, but from a profound, soul-crushing grief. He whispered into the darkness a prayer to the ghost of his home. "Longcheng, forgive me. I could not save you." By 1970, the red tide of communism had washed deep into Laos. Villages fell silent under new flags, their old ways erased. The Hmong people became refugees in their own land, hunted and scattered. But even in the darkest of times, stories sustained them, stories of courage, stories of sacrifice, stories of warriors like Chongneng. Though Longcheng had fallen, Chongneng's fight was far from over. In the grueling years that followed, he would carry the hope of his people on his shoulders, leading them through a desperate retreat, organizing pockets of resistance, and fighting for their very survival, because even as the enemy claimed the land, they could never conquer the heart of a true warrior. Thank you for watching this story of courage and loss from a forgotten corner of history. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more untold stories. We'll see you next time. Imagine a world turned upside down. It's 1975. The Kingdom of Laos has fallen to the communists. For the Hmong people, who had fought bravely alongside America and their leader, General Vang Pao, this was a death sentence. A desperate exodus began, a mad dash for the Mekong River, the only escape route to the refugee camps. In Thailand, thousands risked their lives, crossing the treacherous waters under a hail of bullets, but not everyone could make it, and not everyone wanted to. Among those who stayed was a man named Chongneng. His spirit was a fortress, unyielding and proud. How could he abandon his homeland, the soil that held the graves of his ancestors? How could he leave behind the family and community he was sworn to protect? Looking at the fearful faces of the remaining soldiers from his unit, he made a solemn vow. "If we no longer have a village," he declared, his voice echoing with defiance, "then the jungle will be our village. If we no longer have a country, then the forest will be our country." This was not an admission of defeat. It was a declaration of a new kind of war, a war for survival. With this powerful promise, Chongneng led his family and a small, loyal band of comrades away from the advancing enemy. They didn't flee towards a border. They retreated into the very heart of Laos, into the vast, impenetrable jungle. They climbed into the rugged mountains, seeking refuge in terrain so difficult and remote that even the communists would hesitate to follow. This wilderness was their last sanctuary, their final fortress. In these hidden valleys, they started to rebuild a life from scratch. They became masters of their new environment, their hands calloused from cutting bamboo to construct simple huts that blended seamlessly into the forest canopy. They dug fire pits deep into the earth, carefully shielding the precious flames from prying eyes. The rivers, once scenic waterways, became their lifeline, providing fish to fill their empty stomachs. The forest, once a place of mystery, became their hunting ground, where they stalked wild animals for sustenance. life was reduced to its most basic elements: shelter, water, and food. Every day was a testament to their resilience, but peace was a luxury they could not afford. Nightfall brought no rest, only a heightened state of alert. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig could signal danger. With sharpened ears, they learned to decipher the language of the jungle, the deep growl of a bear, the soft call of a deer, and the one sound they dreaded most, the distant, sharp crack of a communist rifle. Fear became a constant companion, a shadow that clung to them day and night. It was a primal, gut-wrenching fear that never truly left their side, a reminder that their enemies were always out there, searching. Life as a jungle fighter was a life lived in the shadows, almost entirely without sunlight. They were ghosts in their own land. The simple comforts of civilization were a distant memory. They wore the same clothes until they were nothing but rags, threadbare and torn. When sickness struck, there was no medicine, no doctor, no healer to offer comfort or a cure. The children, their eyes wide with a hunger no parent should ever have to see, grew weak. The elderly, repositories of their culture and wisdom, succumbed to illnesses that would have been trivial in any other circumstance. They were cut off, isolated, and utterly alone. When the gnawing pangs of hunger became unbearable, when the cries of the starving children became too much to endure, Chongneng knew he had to act. He would gather the strongest of the young men, their faces etched with a grim determination. Under the cover of darkness, they would embark on perilous raids. Sometimes they would hunt for game, risking encounters with both predators and patrols. Other times, they would dig for edible roots, their fingers raw from clawing at the hard earth. And sometimes, in their most desperate moments, they would become thieves of survival. They would creep to the edges of communist-controlled villages, their hearts pounding in their chests, to steal crops from the fields, a handful of corn, a few yams. It was a bitter pill to swallow. These were their own people, their own lands, yet they were forced to live like outlaws, hunted and reviled, all for the simple act of trying to stay alive. They were no longer citizens of a nation. They were fugitives in a war that had supposedly ended. Their existence became nomadic. They never stayed in one place for long, a week, maybe two, and then it was time to move. The enemy patrols were relentless, methodical in their search. Like a pack of hounds, they scoured the mountains, closing in on any sign of human presence. A wisp of smoke, a broken branch, a footprint in the mud, any of these could betray their location and bring swift, violent retribution, so they kept moving deeper and deeper into the wilderness. The vast, untamed expanse of the Laotian jungle, with its dense canopy and treacherous terrain, became their only shield, their only ally in this unending struggle for freedom. Yet, even in the depths of this misery, surrounded by starvation and sickness, Chongneng never faltered. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of a true leader. He understood that while their bodies might be failing, their spirits could not be broken. He would gather his people, their faces gaunt and their eyes filled with despair, and he would speak to them. "We are Hmong," he would say, his voice a pillar of strength. "They can take our homes, our fields, our country, but they will never take our spirit. Even if we live in the jungle for 1,000 years, we will live as Hmong forever." These were not just words. They were a lifeline. They were a reminder of their identity, their heritage, their unbreakable bond as a people. For those who had lost everything, these words were a reason to keep fighting, a reason to endure one more day of hunger, one more night of fear. His leadership gave them strength when their bodies were weak, and hope when their world was shrouded in darkness. He was the flame that kept their collective spirit alive. Years passed. The world outside the jungle moved on, largely forgetting the secret war still being fought in the mountains of Laos. But whispers began to travel. Hmong refugees who managed to escape to Thailand brought with them incredible stories. They spoke of a hidden group of fighters, ghosts who still roamed the jungle, led by a fearless man named Chongneng. They described a community that had no country, no flag, and no allies, but possessed a spirit that could not be conquered. They lived through unimaginable hunger, devastating sickness, and constant fear, yet their message remained the same, echoing through the mountains and across the borders. We will never let the Hmong name vanish. Chongneng's story is not just a tale of survival, it's a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It is the story of a people who, when faced with the loss of everything, chose to hold on to the one thing that could never be taken away, their identity. They became a living legend, a symbol of defiance whispered in the villages and refugee camps, a story in the forest that continues to inspire. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey into the heart of the Laotian jungle. If this story moved you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribe to the channel. For more untold histories, your support helps us bring these vital stories to light. See you next time.